We all agree, math and science are essential tools for making rational decisions. But how do scientists address issues beyond the boundaries of math and science?
Ultimately, how would you and I know the difference between reliable results and inaccurate or biased reporting? The facts are inescapable. Scientists make the rules and produce research findings. Media reports scientific findings, and the government provides funding for additional scientific research. Thus, ideal conditions exist for a thought monopoly. We've already learned from Dr. Josh Rasmussen that truth may not always correspond to reality. Through the filters of postmodern philosophy, pantheism, and scientism, truth becomes even more elusive. For us to determine if what we think we know is actually true, we need to understand how knowledge is formed. Logically, it seems like we need more than basic scientism to form complete knowledge and therefore establish truth. According to Chaplain John W. Eman of Penn Medical, knowledge is obtained through 4 basic sources, which he calls ways of knowing. Therefore, when reading or hearing information, we must ask ourselves, am I relying on personal experience? Am I using reason and logic? Am I relying on authorities? Am I using intuition and revelation?
The memory capacity of one human brain astronomically exceeds the storage capacity of all computers ever built.
Anyone know what color the sky is?
Blue.
Oh, you're right, it is blue. But how do you know? Timothy, how do you know it's blue?
Because of the sun and the rainbow.
The sun and the rainbow make it blue?
Kind of. Because that's how the world is made.
That's just how the world's made. Okay. Akeem, did you have an idea?
The rain, it makes it blue.
The rain makes it blue? So if it's not raining, how is the sky blue?
Yeah.
Don't know. That's all right.
No.
No ideas?
I think maybe because of the outer space.
Ooh.
Like the sun in the outer space.
Okay. You're a good thinker.
You think in terms of what your kids should know and be able to do by the time they finish their kindergarten year. What does that look like?
In science, we don't have a standardized assessment for science. We have standards that we try to achieve, and in kindergarten, those standards are foundational. So they're, having the kids learn how to work with science tools and learn a little bit about scientific method, what experiments are, and observation, and why science is important and how it applies in life, what scientists do. So it's very foundational. We also, as teachers, try to integrate the critical thinking skills along with those, with those standards. We try to get them to think a little bit more critically about how things happen and problem solving with science and make it relevant to them.
I think they're so exposed to the computer and videos and Netflix and all that. They probably have a lot more visual images than they did when I first started teaching. They have a hard time defining what's real and what's not, and then making the logic of why it is the way it is. Their reality gets a little skewed because no one's processing with them what they're seeing. People, I think in general, are using the television as a babysitter or media as a babysitter for their children instead of using it as a jumping off point to learn concepts. And
Right, there's no interactivity there, is it? It's
Right.
one way.
Mm-hmm. And so the child's left on their own to make sense of what they're seeing and what's real and what's not.
So would you say then that becomes sort of an authority of information for them? If it goes unchecked,
Definitely.
yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if they just don't talk to their parents.
Yeah.
Well, I think in kindergarten they just have natural curiosity too about everything to some extent, and they're still at the point where they want to know. They want to know why, and they're interested and they're naturally curious too. So and I see a lot of misconceptions coming from the kids about things that come up in science.
What color is the sky?
Blue. It's blue.
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 Well, it looks blue.
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 The sky appears to be blue.
How do you know that?
Well, with my minimal knowledge of science, it had to be how the hydrogen elements, I guess, interact with the UV light spectrum.
Reflections off the water.
I'm guessing because I see it that way, and everyone else tells me it's blue.
We see blue?
By observation.
Because I know it probably because of sensory and perception. Or actually, I think it's more intuition. I know the color blue, and I know it resembles the color blue, so I look at the sky, and it's pretty much intuitive that the sky looks blue to me.
The epistemologists, will tell us that basically we learn things through these four methods. We're either through observation, rationalism, or logic and reason, authority, and intuition. And so, of those four, which one do you think you rely on most heavily as a scientist?
Oh, I think, like all scientists, I mostly rely on empirical activity. But I wouldn't say that's to the complete exclusion of things like intuition. I think one of the things that intuition does for scientists is allow them to focus their attention on a small part of a range of phenomena that might be observed. There was a famous geneticist, Barbara McClintock, who decided to work with corn, maize, in doing genetics. And that seemed very counterintuitive because it's got a huge number of chromosomes and it's very complicated. Why didn't she start with fruit fly? She just had an intuition that there would be something really interesting there. And there was. She won the Nobel Prize, I think.
Yeah.
Most people have heard of that. You only use 10% of your brain. Well, that's never been a scientific fact, but it's been a common belief in spite of nobody's ever said that in the sciences as far as I know. And like the bit capacity of the human brain is bigger than the bit capacity of the physical universe by 10 to the 100th power.
What exactly do you mean by bit capacity?
So like a hard drive on a computer has some number of gigabytes, billions of bytes, and there's 8 bits in a byte.
Is it the same as storage capacity?
Storage capacity. And so if you take all the particles in the universe, there's about 10 to the 80 of those. The bit capacity of the universe from just the elements of it, and if you maybe consider gravity, one of the forces that governs that universe partially, you get a maximum of 10 to the 120 bits. And I think so far in the history of the universe, 10 to the 90 have been operated on. So how is it that the human brain manages to have 10 to the 8,000 bits for its capacity when the physical universe, which our brains are made up of some of those same particles, has a Google more, 10 to the 100th, I think. The connections, synapses, and then all the varied ways that the brain functions. There's no wasted space, and I think we're just coming into the realm where we're beginning to understand the brain and the mind-body connection. Just in the last decade or so, we can actually watch individual neurons firing. So that's quite an advance.
Is there any evidence in the other hominids that you're aware of that they have artistic ability and the ability to make music or to form some sort of religious type rules?
If there are, again, anecdotal pieces of information, and that will require rewriting of the definition of what is art, what is religion. And I think that there are manifestations of these animals. So for example, some chimpanzees can paint, and some elephants can paint, and whales sing, and they sing a song that actually fits the definition of what is a song, a theme that is repeated and it has variation. Whether that's art in the sense that humans produce art, whether the awe and the celebration that chimpanzees do when it rains, and that sense of awe is equivalent with the sense of awe that our ancestors felt when the volcano erupted, and then they decided there must be this superpower who makes this happen. Going back to our discussion about the phenomenon and the cause, that somebody must cause this, somebody's wills must. I don't know whether we can draw these parallels because we cannot talk with
they
these
don't have
animals.
art shows.
Well,
necessarily.
yeah, but the expression of some art is a form of knowing the world. It's another approach of knowing the world, not as systematic and syllogistic and experimentally not based on us proposing a hypothesis and then testing the validity of the hypothesis. But art is a form of knowing the world, a form of finding out about rules and universalities about this world. Do animals know rules and universalities? They know. Do they express it in a different way? Some might.
There is a concept that's called the ways of knowing, 4 ways of knowing. And so do you separate, as a person, do you separate knowledge and belief? Or do you think that beliefs, say intuition, revelation, could be a launching point for further scientific exploration in many cases?
I think it could be. I've, the things that I think I know emerge from experiments, things I've done in a physics lab since I was an undergraduate student, where I think I know how electricity and magnetism behaves and gravity, and so those are things I you could say have merged into my being as beliefs based on physical experiments and my experience of those experiments. There are things that I don't have as direct experience of, and they may or may not have been studied. I'm associated with a project where I go to northern India and teach Tibetan monks cosmology every year. And that's an interesting program, and it was started by the Dalai Lama 10 years ago. And in parallel to the courses that I teach them, there are neuroscientists that come out because His Holiness invited them to come out and wire up lamas and senior monks who are meditating, and they're doing research on well-being and meditative states and so on, and that's pretty new agey stuff in Western medicine, but it's serious scientists and neuroscientists doing the work, and the Buddhist monks are fully engaged in it. So that's an area where something that almost has the level of folklore in the West can actually move into the world of science, and I've sort of been close to watching that, so I can see how it can happen.
All right.
In the philosophy of knowledge, epistemology, we think a lot about sort of what's the foundation of all knowledge. And there's really only, 2 views on this. One is that there is no foundation. So, the other is that there is a foundation. And I think that there's got to be some kind of a foundation to all of our knowledge. And so then we can look at what's the foundation, what are they like? This is tricky because, sometimes people will associate how things seem with irrational intuitions.
Yes.
But if you think about it, everything in logic, coming back to this question, what justifies logic? Why think that whatever is true is true? That's so obvious, like you wouldn't even, or why think that if A is true and A implies B, then B is thereby true? Why think that? I ask my students this sometimes. Well, why do you think that? These basic rules of logic, and they have no answer to it. But I think the answer really is because it just seems true.
Yes.
And so we can come into the science room with some P-prims or some basic beliefs, but willing to discover new evidence that can shed new light on that. And so we can be rational in our belief on the basis of these basic beliefs, but then new evidence can lead us to realize that, oh, actually, although we were rational, reality was more complex, and so we advance in our understanding. Usually the epistemologists will put it into two broad categories: experience and reason. And perhaps those categories can be divided further. For example, in the category of experience, there is the category of testimony. You experience somebody's testimony, but that's different than directly observing something yourself, right? And in the category of reason, you can divide that between the reason that's encoded by logic and the reason that is encoded by rational intuition that has not yet been understood as sort of recognized logic. And so in my area, I mean, I use all of that, right? Reason, empirical evidence, testimony is a source of knowledge. I think sometimes people think, well, we can't believe just on testimony, that's unreliable. We need to believe based on science. But what those folk don't usually appreciate is that almost everything that we believe about science comes through testimony. The testimony of scientists. I didn't do the experiments myself. And so everybody has people that they trust and they consider it to be an expert. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable then.
Well, history itself. History itself relies on, experience of the people who lived during the time.
Right.
By applying each of these tests, we can become confident that our knowledge and beliefs actually align with reality. The process of knowledge formation is called epistemology. Epistemology is a subcategory of philosophy. You remember our friend Professor Wilson, right? Well, now we know his worldview is based on scientism, and his beliefs are pantheistic. Therefore, his view of reality is limited. In universities today, PhD candidates can easily graduate without fully utilizing the tools of philosophy. Therefore, reason, logic, intuition, and revelation are seldom used in scientific research. Is it possible that there are other PhD scholars whose knowledge and beliefs are more coherent with reality?
Well, I think knowledge includes belief, but it has more than just belief. I think knowledge includes belief plus some kind of adequate support or some kind of warrant. Philosophers sometimes analyze knowledge as a belief that's true and warranted. So these three things that go together. And so this is how I would understand knowledge. So we want to understand if we want to know what's true, I think we have to have some kind of warrant for our belief in order for it to count as knowledge.
All right. The difference between knowledge and belief then is just the level of confidence that you have in the information?
I would say yes. It's a difference in the level of confidence. So I believe something, and that means that I'm at least 51% sure that it's that it's probably true. And I know something. I can't really put a percentage on that, but it would be much higher than 51%. On a good day it might be 99%, and on a bad day it might be 72%. So.
What do you rely on mostly? Do you rely on observation, reason and logic, empiricism, intuition?
All of the above.
All the above.
You are a scientist, an experimental scientist, rather than a theoretical scientist. You need to do experiments, you want to work, and you're a biologist, that means with organisms. But nothing is going to replace your having ideas, your intuition of formulating hypotheses, things that now you want to study experimentally. And so you need all these components to really be a good scientist. See, the laws of physics are not going to explain this conversation that we are having.
Right. It's a agree or disagree, true or false. There are phenomena that physical science and the laws of nature cannot explain. True or false?
True.
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 Okay, well, would you be surprised to know that the National Science Foundation would consider you science illiterate?
Yes, I know that.
Oh my gosh. Shame on you. Wow.
I mean, it depends on what they mean by phenomena,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
I mean, the way I interpreted that question, phenomena can include spiritual phenomena.
Oh, sure.
And so that question seems to be very focused on this philosophical idea that there is nothing other than the physical in the universe, which anyone who believes in God doesn't accept that,
Sure.
right? So I'm puzzled by why they put the question that way, but it seems to me that that was written by an atheist. That's the only thing that I can say. In terms of physical phenomenon in the physical universe, I think I am optimistic that eventually science will be able to explain everything in the physical universe.
Yeah.
But science certainly cannot explain the spiritual universe,
Sure.
and science, it's another realm for science to explain God, and God is not a material being.
Yeah.
And so, I find that really actually very funny.
Well, yes.
There is a worldview which corresponds more closely to reality than scientism. According to noted intellectual and Christian apologist Ravi Zacharias, humanity's questions about origin, meaning, morality, and destiny cannot be answered by science alone.
These vexing topics are called boundary questions. Answers to these questions have eluded scholars since antiquity.
So boundary questions are again something that I've adopted because of Ian Barber's work. It's those kinds of questions that through scientific study might arise, and yet science itself can't provide the answers. So it's a boundary for scientific inquiry. The study of science or the study of nature might raise particular questions, but it can't answer the questions because the answer to the question lies beyond the boundary of the methods that are available to science. So examples of a boundary question would be, why is there order in nature? Why are there natural and physical laws? Why is there something instead of nothing? Why does the universe exist? Why are there cognitive beings that can comprehend the universe or that can ask questions like why? Those are all boundary questions. Through our study of science and nature, we're led to ask those kinds of questions, and yet through the scientific methods and processes, we can't come to answers. Science can't address the answers to boundary questions.
Wow.
But philosophy and theology, they answer those types of boundary questions head on.
Yeah, so that's why there's multiple ways of knowing. It's not just all what you can test, feel, measure. And
that's right. Yeah. There are multiple ways of knowing.
For truth seekers to find answers to these boundary questions, we must embrace a worldview which is more comprehensive and coherent with reality than scientism. In short, it must include reason, logic, intuition, and revelation.
I believe that there is a creator that's responsible for the universe in which we live, and he's revealed himself. He's revealed himself through two means. Scripture, the Bible, the inspired Word of God, but also through the record of nature. And that we're commanded to research and study both. So what I tell believers and unbelievers alike, from a theistic perspective, we're all supposed to be scientists. It's not an option, it's a command. The Bible repeatedly exhorts us to research and study the record of nature, telling us that the more we know about the record of nature, the more we discover from the record of nature, the more we're going to see the handiwork of God, the more we're going to understand about God and how we can relate to Him. But the same thing is true of the record of Scripture. And I think too, what we see from a biblical Christian perspective is that we expect constructive integration. Biology will constructively integrate with physics and with chemistry and with geology and anthropology. And so that's going to motivate us. We don't see these disciplines fitting together. We know we've missed something.
Yeah.
Or we're biased in some way, we're misinterpreting it.
Mm-hmm.
But I apply the same principle to the 66 books of the Bible, is that we look for a consistent literal interpretation. I tell Christians it's not enough to take the Bible literally, we have to take it literally and consistently. Because there are parts of Scripture where metaphors are used, and the way you find that out is by integrating the different books of the Bible.
Yeah.
Maybe people with this alternative belief system are the very citizens Dr. Wilson and his cohorts in the thought monopoly are referring to as metaphysical misfits who belong to the culture of hate. Perhaps Hillary Clinton also tossed them into her basket of deplorables. To check our intuition, let's begin by considering public opinions about education, science, and politics in America today.
According to the latest Pew survey on Americans, politics, and science issues, respondents want public education to increase emphasis in 3 areas. 1. Math. 2. English grammar and writing. 3. Science or history. However, in the same survey, 46% of Americans said the reason many young people don't pursue degrees in math and science is because the subjects are too hard. Another 42% of respondents said these subjects might be too boring or not useful for their careers. That's an astounding 88% of people surveyed. In another survey on public and scientists' views on science and society, researchers concluded, despite broadly similar views about the overall place of science in America, citizens and scientists often see science-related issues through different sets of eyes. There are large differences in their views across a host of issues. In a longitudinal study of Cornell University science students, researchers concluded that there is suggestive evidence that science students are pulled away by their high grades in non-science courses and pushed out by their low grades in their major field.
Knowledge comes to us through 4 streams. Scientism relies on only 3 of these. Therefore, we need a more comprehensive worldview than scientism to find answers to boundary questions. In Part 4, we will explore worldviews held by our scholars. I'm John Jones. See you next time on Thought Monopoly.
For more information, email us at thoughtmonopoly@gmail.com.